The San Francisco 49ers fired their special teams coordinator, maybe the worst kept secret that was going to happen. Uh, Dre Greenlaw, he was throwing a going away party. We're going to discuss that and Brock Purdy's contract projections moving forward, all that and more right here on Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On 49ers. I'm your host, former NFL and AFL defensive back, Eric Crocker. And as you can see on this beautiful Tuesday morning, I am joined by my guy, Jason Aponte. We want to thank you for making Locked On 49ers your first listen of the day. And definitely a good time to get into some 49ers stuff. Obviously, if you're watching on YouTube right now live, you can see we're still missing my co-host, Brian Peacock. But you guys continue to pray for him, pray for his family, and hopefully he's back soon. All right, Ponte, man, let's first of all, Happy New Year. And we were kind of debating on if it was too late to tell each other Happy New Year, but I think as long as it's the first time you're seeing someone within, first couple weeks of the new year, I think you can still say Happy New Year. So Happy New Year, Jason.
Happy New Year, Croc. And I think that's the disclaimer. That's the part you should put on it is this is the first time we've spoken in the new year. Now, if this first time that we speak is March 28th, I don't think you can Happy New Year each other. But right. I think it's well within this rounds. And I listen to Larry David for a lot of things, but this one, we gotta put a little asterisk on it. You got it right, I think.
We have to. And we'll see if it's a Happy New Year for Brian Schnider because the 49ers, they fired their special teams coordinator. I think a lot of people wanted this to happen. And we've talked about it a little bit on this show. There are three phases to football, the three big phases. You got offense, defense, special teams. And everybody always wonders, who's the offensive coordinator going to be? Who's the defensive coordinator going to be? The special teams coordinator is just as important or almost as important. And obviously as a 49ers saw, and I saw in the chat yesterday, as people are trying to find reasons as to, man, why did the 49ers lose? There were some people like, man, special teams, it was atrocious. And there may not be anything that Brian Schnider could do about your kicker getting a high ankle sprain. He comes back not healthy, missing a lot of kicks. Jake Moody, Wisnowski, he missed a lot of games. He got hurt. I think not having him, not just as your punter, but also as your holder for your kicks, that could make a difference with some of those aspects of special teams. But I think just as a whole, outside of even the kickers, 49ers special teams unit, not very good. And it seems like special teams has kind of been an issue for the Niners. They've been trying to figure out different ways to kind of either work around it or fix it. Not sure exactly what the answer is, but for them right now, they feel like the answer is firing Brian Schnider.
Yeah, and that's the issue is you have the coordinator and then you allocate valuable draft capital to the two kickers and you think, okay, this will improve things. We'll have someone who's going to punt the ball down the field so no one will be able to have a chance to return it. And we're going to have a kicker that's going to be able to make 40 and 50-yard kicks. But the crux of the problem is just execution. And it always feels like anytime we're watching a football game with the 49ers in it, we can feel a fake punt coming, but they can't. And for every one time that they stop it, there's 4 or 5 other times where they don't. And it happened again in Arizona. It's a little bit strange because I think the discussion becomes, this is going to be your third special teams coordinator. But under Kyle Shanahan, and let's be frank, even before that, it felt like special teams would always fall by the wayside, right? I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the last time that a 49ers punt return was for a touchdown was Ted Ginn in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. Now, that's a long time ago. So this is before Kyle Shanahan. But during Kyle Shanahan's time, it does feel like special teams, for whatever reason, is just either something that they try to throw money at, which I mean by like draft capital and everything, instead of trying to figure out why it is that teams just can execute better on special teams and they can't do the little things. So I do think the coordinator thing was a little bit of a worst kept secret. It's just now who's the next one. And if that doesn't change next year, then what's the discussion after that?
I think a big part of just being good on special teams is having people that are dedicated to being good special teamers, whether it is a returner like a Ted Ginn. Like, I don't think when the 49ers signed Ted Ginn, it was because he's going to be this amazing receiver. And although he did contribute as a receiver, his main contributions were as a returner for the 49ers. Back in those days, they had a guy by the name of Kasem Osgood, right? Osgood, he was a receiver. But where was he going to make his money? As a key contributor on special teams. There's a special teams player on the Dallas Cowboys right now that actually came from 49ers Goodwin, I believe. He was a 6'4" guy, kind of went from receiver to defensive back. But most importantly, he could run. He was a high flyer, and he was a guy that was going to really contribute to special teams. I think the last time the 49ers were actually pretty good at special teams was probably when Raheem Mostert was a gunner. And he was really good running down there on punts, on kicks. So I think one thing that the 49ers could do, aside from hiring someone that maybe has a slightly different philosophy than what they got from Brian Schnider, but find like who's going to be your special teams ace? Who's going to be that guy on the special teams unit that you feel like, you know what, teams are going to have to really account for him, and he's going to make a difference. Because I think right now, whether it's as a gunner or a guy in the return game, the 49ers kind of missing that guy.
Yeah, for sure. And special teams ace is the best way to put it, like a Matthew Slater type, right? Like he's consistently in the Pro Bowl, all pro at that position. And it is funny that you bring up Raheem Mostert, because that's exactly who I thought of. And funny enough, that was during the Chip Kelly time. So Chip Kelly kind of knew what Mostert could do. So yeah, it is interesting. I think the discussion is more now, what's going to happen with this new special teams coordinator? And then if it doesn't pan out, then when do we start to say, well, what's really going on, Kyle Shanahan, behind, closed doors with the special teams? Are you paying attention to it at all? Do you really care? Or are you just like, hey, we're going to prioritize this and that, and that'll figure itself out? And I think the most frustrating part is if the 49ers were a net zero average special teams team this season, they probably would have won a few more games. And that's not even me asking them to be special. It's just asking them to be average and give you just nothing. But they gave away so many points based on special teams, whether it's missed kicks or, obviously returns or just, not downing the football. It's frustrating to watch professional football players look like they're out of position the entire time. And hopefully a coordinator change is going to change it. But if not, then we got to start asking Kyle about, hey, what are you guys prioritizing over there?
King Theo in the chat says Olin was supposed to be that. He's a Pro Bowl gunner. And that is someone that they did bring in for special teams unit. And not just him, there was Oren Burks as well. They brought him in to kind of be a special teams guy. Burks, by the way, it was just reported what he had, like 17 tackles in week 18 game. So not just contributing on special teams, but also as a linebacker as well, getting some extra time while some guys are sitting. Special teams, it's one of those right now, I'm a head coach, and I got to hire a defensive coordinator, hire an offensive coordinator. And the one thing I haven't even addressed yet is special teams. And it's one of those most important units, especially in high school football, because high school football, man, that field position can flip really quick. If somebody just has a dynamic player on the other side, more times than not, it's just your best player. He's back there returning. That could hurt a squad. And it's crazy, even with me knowing that, it's still one of the things that I still have not addressed yet. And I'm like, well, we'll get there. We'll get to special teams. Let's get this office coordinating stuff and defensive coordinating stuff situated. I hope that's not the thought process of Kyle Shanahan. He has a lot more resources and a lot more options than I do. I have to find somebody that knows a little bit about special teams and kind of build off of that. He has guys that, truly want to be good as being a special teams coordinator, even if that's all that they do. So hopefully the 49ers, they really start to prioritize that even more. Whatever he's done and whatever he thought that this is enough as a special teams coordinator, more, whether it's the coach, whether it's the players, whatever you thought you've done and you thought that was enough, it clearly is not enough, because this has been a unit that has consistently, I don't want to say failed the 49ers, but it's definitely been an issue. Do you foresee any other firings happen? A lot of people are looking at Nick Sorensen. They're like, okay, we haven't heard from him yet. You're seeing some of the coordinators around the league fired. Cincinnati Bengals defensive coordinator, he was fired. Some head coaches fired. Some offensive coordinators fired. But right now, Nick Sorensen looks like he still has his job. Is that something that worries you moving forward? Do you think Kyle Shanahan is like, you know what, let's build on this year? Yes, it wasn't great. It wasn't good at all. And a lot of people are really upset about the production the 49ers got defensively. But, hey, man, there's some injuries. I really like you. We're going to get it together. You're a first-time coordinator. Do you think they keep Nick Sorensen around, or do you say, nope, he'll be axed in the next few days?
I have it at 50-50, and here's why. Last season, when the 49ers were a top 10 overall defense in EPA per play under Steve Wilkes, it was the worst kept secret that Steve Wilkes was going to go, right? And they had a much better performing defense last season than they did this year. I think when you listen to everybody speak about Nick Sorensen, regardless of what people outside the building are saying about him, it's kind of glowing. Kyle says, I like what he's been doing. Nick Bosa, I'd like to run it back. Demo Lenore, I like what they did. Like, for someone who is a sure firing, they sure are saying a lot more nice things about him than they ever did when Steve Wilkes was there. And that was a better defense last season, even if we were frustrated with that one. So I'm 50-50. I do believe that there is a little bit to the thought process of we can't go into this next season with another defensive coordinator regardless. But either way, whatever defensive coordinators brought in here, I don't think they're going to be allowed to revamp everything. And then the other thing, too, about the Sorensen discussion that I feel like is lost in translation is because the 49ers have been playing so long into the season, so late into the season, it's been hard for them to get into the saddle and talk to people because everybody starts doing business the day after they're eliminated. The 49ers were having a bye week. They were getting ready for the divisional, then the NFC Championship. And they called Belichick, and Belichick said no. They called and tried to get Spagnuolo. Spagnuolo said no. And then they ended up with Sorensen. So I wonder if the dynamic is, you know what? A lot of guys were hurt. We had our flashes. Look what happened when Greenlaw came back and when Hufanga was back and the defense looked a little bit better. I wonder if that sample size and the context around the season with the idea of we can't have another defensive coordinator going into the season overlaps any sort of, hey, we got to get rid of him and we got to get somebody else in here. So I'm 50-50. I think it can go either way. That's probably not an interesting answer, but I'm just talking about like the way they've been speaking about him, Croc. Like, again, last year with Wilkes, they're telling everybody that he's not going to be around regardless. And they made it to a few plays from winning the Super Bowl. And then on the flip side, this defense is underperformed, and yet they can't go out of their way without saying so many nice things about Sorensen. So I guess that's the way I'm looking at it, is just the way that they're speaking about him.
All right, so it sounds like 49er fans, they might just be a little bit more upset for another year with Nick Sorensen at some capacities being a coach on the 49ers. We'll see how they handle that. Free agency has to be handled, and there was a going-away party for one of the 49ers' key players. Will he return? What are the odds of him being back? And some other guys that may be departing the San Francisco 49ers. We're going to talk about that next. This episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by Rocket Money. All right. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about? And I don't know. Listen, if you're like me, I have all these subscriptions that I pay for. I have subscriptions with Netflix, and you got Hulu and a bundle of other ones that I didn't even realize I was actually paying for. But $10 hits my account here and there. $15 hits my account. Man, what is this 30 coming out? Well, Rocket Money, that's the thing that's going to really help you get all of those subscriptions intact. All right. I had a few subscriptions, didn't even realize I was still paying for them. Rocket Money, they make it easy to track all of those down. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and it helps you lower all of your bills so that you can grow in your savings. It brings everything together all in one place, whether it's your subscriptions, your spending habits, or even goals that you want for the new year 2025. Rocket Money has 5 million users, and they save a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions every single year. All right, members are saving up to $740 per year when using all the app's premium options and features. So for me, one of the best features that I've come across with this is the subscription tracker. All right, I've been used to just having to try to cancel these services on my own, but I wasn't using any of them, and I finally saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside a money for my future. All right, there's no more stressing about budgeting every single month. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on. rocketmoney.com/locked-on. Aponte, did you see that there was a going away party for a certain 49er player? Now, I'm putting the pieces together here, and this is posted on TikTok for one of his wives, like losing my best friend, right? They throw a whole going away party. This has to be Dre Greenlaw, right?
Yeah, it does. The 57 gave it away. The big 57 on the wall that they have in like balloons. I was like, come on. I mean, I was like, in my head, I was just like, man, please just tell me that they're talking about, some random player at the bottom of the 53. But I do think that this feels a little overly dramatic when it comes to like, oh, he's gone. Like, you haven't even started talking about, anything. But Greenlaw's been very vocal. I think he was asked in a funny way, like, what does he want for Christmas? And he was like, some money. And I think he knows that it's his time, and rightfully so. I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be up there. But I just want 49ers fans to understand that we're only a few days into the offseason. And how many times have we seen things like this before in one way or another when it comes to 49ers free agents, whether it's Debo and the club going like this, like if he's going to come back, and, somebody saying, oh, he gone. Like, remember after the Super Bowl, Ayuk's sister was saying, this is why we're not coming back. And it's like, guys, let's settle down. And obviously this is not what you want to see, but I wouldn't take this to the bank and say, well, he gone now or anything like that. I think that, again, people say things in the time and the emotion. Maybe it's not even something that necessarily was cleared, like to be said, but I'm not as worried about it. Now, I'll worry about it when I start to see some reports about, Greenlaw's meeting with this team and this team and this team. That's when you start to get worried. But as far as this party, I think it's just right now, it shouldn't cause too much alarm, in my opinion. But you definitely don't want to see that.
Yeah, I think one thing is clear. He'll probably be able to test the market and kind of see what's out there. I remember a few years back, it might have been like the COVID year or maybe the year after that, but Kawhi Williams and there were a couple other guys that people expected the 49ers to just flat out lose. There's no way the 49ers bring this guy back, but they tested the market, realized that, man, the money that we thought we may be able to get is not quite out there to that extent. So you know what? Maybe I can come back to the 49ers on a one-year deal and be able to help the 49ers at least for another season. And, you want Dre Greenlaw to get his money, but obviously, selfishly, you're hoping that there is a way that they could bring back 57 because it was a noticeable difference when he wasn't on the field in the regular season. And then when he came back, I'm like, wait, what the heck? Right? Like, it was one of those things where you don't know you miss it until you are missing it. So he was gone. 49ers linebackers, they're out there playing. All right, whatever. You see Devondre Campbell, okay, you would like to get better. But it's like, oh, man, we should be better with Dre Greenlaw when he returns. And then he comes back, and I'm like, wow, it is a stark difference. And you see just the explosiveness that he plays with and his sideline speed and him beating some of the other defenders, just how fast he's playing mentally and that edge that he brings. And then he was gone. And like, man, I really miss Dre Greenlaw out there. So I don't think that Fred Warner's wife is the only one that's going to be missing Dre Greenlaw if he does indeed go somewhere else. But Greenlaw won't be the only departure if he does indeed leave. Charvarious Ward, he was talking about just kind of this season. And we all know just some of the tragedy that he's had to deal with from this season, losing a child. And there were a few different guys that were dealing with a lot of things throughout the season. That made it very difficult. But for him in particular, Charvarious Ward will be a free agent, and they got to talking about that. And he mentioned how if he had the same season that he did last year, he was 100% without a doubt going to hit the free agency market and likely be somewhere else because he's going to be priced out of whatever the 49ers' potential budget was for an outside corner, especially after bringing back Damador Lenore. Well, he also goes on to say that the season didn't go as planned. He didn't have the same season that he had last year, and it may make it to where he is more affordable for the 49ers, just depending on where the market is. So Charvarious Ward will test the market, but there's the other aspect to it. It's California kind of has a stain in his family right now. And he talked about how his wife doesn't even want to come. His wife is staying away and staying out of California now because everything about California reminds them of their loss. And that's tough. I can't even imagine what they're going through from that perspective. But he's like, man, my wife is my everything. And now she doesn't want to be in California. I think that would make it a little more tougher for the 49ers to be able to bring back a Charvarious Ward.
Obviously the tragedy is not something that, can be discussed unless, you've been in that sort of situation. And I pray to God that I never will be. And I can't imagine. But I'm also really glad that he opened up about the things that are outside of this, right? Because I think a lot of fans look at it and say, well, why would you want to leave an organization that's going to put you with a chance to win? And then you forget that these people are human. You forget that the circumstances outside and that it's not personal and that he's not saying, I want to leave here just because, screw the 49ers or something like that. Like, this is something that is going on in his mind. He has to take care of his family. His family is always priority number one. So you think about that part of it. And I'm kind of glad that he opened up because I do think it's refreshing for fans to hear that this is really something that's a part of my thought process. And I don't want you to turn around if I sign with someone else and say, well, Mooney said screw the 49ers and left, and you take that personally. It's less about football teams and money more than anything. It's just protecting your family. And as you know, as a father, I understand that completely, and I understand exactly where Mooney's coming from. As far as just the player and roster building aspect of it, I think we expected Mooney to be the one that went, right. And this is before any sort of tragedy or anything like that. That just adds another layer onto it, which can probably lead you to understand that he's probably not going to be back. Because I still think that there's going to be a team out there that's going to pay Charvarious Ward what they think he will be if he can bounce back to that form, right? Like teams are always going to take a chance on a corner like that, because if you unearth that and you get him back to that level, it's a steal. But they're going to go fine with Lenore and Green, and I think it just felt like Mooney was the odd man out regardless. So whether the market is a little bit different because of the season that he has, I'm sure that any team that will negotiate with him understands what he went through this season, and they'll take that into account. But I'm fairly certain that a team is going to give Mooney Ward a fair amount of money, you know, if not exactly what he thought he was going to get if he put together another season, just based on the idea of like, we can get him to bounce back this other way. It'll be a huge boost for us. But I am really glad that Mooney brought that up, because I don't want 49er fans to say, well, you know, he could have came back here for less money to run it back and be. Yeah, it's not always about the money. It's not always about the situation. He's prioritizing his family, and I think that's the part that is refreshing to hear.
No, definitely. There's some other players that may be hitting free agency. Javon Hargraves, he's going to be a free agent. Did I see that right?
Yeah, I think post June 1, especially after the restructure, it feels like they'll make a move on Hargrave as well too. Which, you know, again, if you're looking into the draft, you've got to start figuring out defensive tackle, and you know, you've got to really get into this draft process really early, because it might be likely that whoever you take a defensive tackle, whatever round, they might have to step up and play right away unless you fill it in free agency some way. But yeah, I would think that Javon Hargrave is going to go post June 1.
Aaron Banks, he's slated to be a free agent, and the 49ers, they locked up Diamador Lenore. It's crazy how fast time flies. I feel like it was just yesterday that Aaron Banks was drafted, and now this guy, he's going to be a free agent. Do you foresee the 49ers bringing back Aaron Banks?
I don't think so. And I think, again, when you look at the market and the way that linemen are paid, someone's going to pay Aaron Banks a lot of money because he's a starting lineman, because he's been on the 49ers line. You know, I think if you look around and you see some of these lineman contracts that are going out, i.e., let's say Mike McGlinchey, right? Remember how down bad people were on Mike McGlinchey, and they didn't really they didn't want him. And then the Denver Broncos, what they do? They were like, what? A starting right tackle? Here's all this money, man. Like, please. So, you know, starting linemen are hard to come by, and they generally get their bag. So yeah, I think somebody's going to pay Aaron Banks. I just don't think it's going to be the 49ers.
You know, it's crazy that you talked about it. Like, you talked about McGlinchey, and you're like, you know, starting right tackle, and you talked about Banks, and the way that the 49ers offensive line is viewed, everybody thinks that the O-line stinks. And I'm like, you know, you guys need to watch a little bit more of some football outside of just the 49ers and take more of I don't want to say pride in watching it, but just really watch it. Like, watch it the same way you would watch the 49ers, and you watch some of these other offensive lines, O-line play around the league, it's just down. And right now, quarterbacks, is on them to try to overcome whatever is happening up front and be able to kind of mask it a little bit. So the person that's supposed to mask the offensive line for the 49ers, Brock Purdy, we're going to talk about his projections for his contract coming up next. All right, there was a report floating around, and this is just a projection of Brock Purdy's contract. All right, so I'm going to set it up on the screen and share the screen for y'all so everybody can see this. But here we go. This is just a projection right here, so this isn't the actual numbers. But I'm assuming that, you know, I feel like it'll fall somewhere around here. All right, and this is ML Football. He's kind of reporting this, but it's just a projection again for Brock Purdy in his contract because he's eligible for an extension as of today. Purdy is projected to sign a 5-year, $290 million contract this offseason with $180 million in guarantees. That's an average annual salary of $58 million per year, which will make him the second highest paid quarterback in the league. Aponte, when you hear those numbers, and thrown around, and I think the biggest one everybody will probably focus on is the $58 million per year, even though it should be more about, you know, the guarantees and the way the contract is structured. But $58 million per year for Brock Purdy, is that something with what you've seen from him so far? We've seen some good. We've seen some not so good. I don't even want to say bad, because I don't think that at any point, Brock has been like this terrible quarterback. But
Mhm.
you've seen some good, you've seen some not so good. Some really high moments. 49ers going to a Super Bowl with him, going to a conference championship with him. What are your thoughts on Brock Purdy being the second highest paid quarterback in the league?
That kind of goes with it. At this point, I kind of understand that because we have to understand how the market is and what the market dictates. And when Brock Purdy's looking around at other quarterbacks who are in his tier, right? I don't like doing quarterback rankings, Crack. I think, it's like tiers, right? Like there's levels, to like, you got your elite guys and then you got your guys from week to week that could be one of the other. I do think that kind of sits in the right spot. Now, we have to remember other things, right? That number is going to be that way for about 10 minutes. Because right after that, Josh Allen is going to sign his deal and push it all the way up to the front. He'll be third after that. And then someone else will come up. Like, I think what the numbers jump out, and then one, we don't know the structure. I'm so glad you brought that up because that really matters more than anything. Like, what's the structure? What's the dead cap hit? What's the amount of cap that he's going to be taking up? What's the guarantees? Is there an out? Like, a lot of these things are going to be in there, and we don't know that. When you see the run numbers, you just think, oh my God, he's going to get all of that money all the time. Well, there's going to be qualifiers and things like that for that as well, too. But I think that it's not as crazy to think that. Now, do I see those numbers off the bat? I want to say no, just based on the source right there, like who it is. That seems like a fair projection from almost anybody. Like that doesn't need to be sourced. Like if you're doing your projections of it, you could come up with that number and be just about right. I do have it in that area, probably a little bit lower, but lower with the idea of incentive wise, if we get back to the Super Bowl, if we get back to this, I get this. And I think that's the stuff that if they're all committed in Brock Purdy and Brock Purdy believes in himself, you should take those sort of deals because you feel like next year, Christian McCaffrey is going to be healthy and Ayuk will be back and another year of Pearsall and another draft class. And, hopefully there's not all these injuries. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not too worried about it. I do think that number does seem about right, but I caution against panicking with that without knowing the structure and knowing how much of it is going to be allocated per year and what's the dead cap hits and everything. That's why I stay away from talking about salary cap, but that looks fine to me. I would have no issue with that, especially considering who he'd be jumping over. And we could say through those 3 years that he's been better than like Tua and Trevor Lawrence at times. And those guys got the bag and everything as well too. So why wouldn't he ask for something similar?
So my question to you is, right, and you talked about what these other guys are getting. Someone in the chat, and I should have saved it just now when I saw it, but they talked about the Dallas Cowboys and basically saying they don't want to follow the Cowboys blueprint, which was we're going to pay Dak Prescott all this money because the market dictates what this guy should get. How do you feel about the market for quarterbacks? And you mentioned guys like Tua. Like, do you think that the Miami Dolphins are happy with what they paid Tua and the production that they're getting out of him to this point? Like, is that something that right now, if you're a Miami Dolphin fan, are you excited and happy about the future of the Dolphins because you have Tua Tagovailoa at your quarterback position?
See, that's the problem. And I think that's why the market is where it's at, is because teams are in this position of, if we don't sign this player, then what do we do? And everyone is scared to death of restarting, right? Especially a quarterback. So if you say, you know what, Tua, we're not going to pay you. Well, what's next? Skylar Thompson? Or, like where do you go to the position? Like you can go into the draft and look and be excited about a guy. But I think the fear of the unknown has pushed front offices to get rid of that whole crapshoot and say, you know what, man? Here's your money because we don't want to have to worry about this. And we've got you and we've won games with you and everything as well, too. Is a Dolphins fan happy? That I'm not certain of. But I know for a fact that it's going to take one organization or one front office to stop this from increasing to the point by saying, you know what? If you want 60 or 65 million, go find it. And if you find someone who's going to pay it to you, then you can go. But I guarantee that if you go out there, you're not going to find it. And you're not going to bully us into just giving you the money just because someone else gave it away. So it's going to take one front office, one organization to really put a stop to this. I don't know who, and I don't know who's going to be the quarterback. But that's kind of where we are. It's just the fear of the unknown. Front offices and organizations are panicking. And they're just saying, you know what? Sign the quarterback because we can't go into the season without a quarterback. And we've won at least a bunch of games with him.
Bobo in the chat says Tyreek is not happy with the Tua contract. And at one point he was. At one point he's like, man, most accurate quarterback I've ever played with. And I feel like players do that. And then the fans, they suck that up. And they're like, oh, man, this guy, look, they love him and he's so good. And then the moment things start getting a little weird, the players are like, deuces, get me out of this place. I don't know if you saw this, but Tyreek Hill changed his profile picture to Antonio Brown leaving the field for Tampa, but like they put his face, they put Tyreek Hill face on. Like he wants out of there. And when I think about Brock Purdy, I don't foresee 49 player going to that extent.
Mhm.
But I think the biggest thing is when you pay a guy a lot of money like this, the expectations of that player changes, and not just for the fan base, but dang, shoot, probably for his teammates, the ownership, right? So now you're living more under a microscope. So some of the things that I feel like with Brock, we're still viewing through the eyes of this Mr. Irrelevant, last pick in the NFL draft, pick 262, where he doesn't play well in inclement weather. That's actually kind of weird. And I don't think that there's a big enough microscope on that. And maybe people are like, well, it doesn't matter because the 49ers, they don't play in a lot of inclement weather. Maybe you're thinking that. But at some point you will. And do you want that to be the reason why you ultimately end up losing a game? Because this is a guy that has shown you time and time again, he does not play his best football in those type of conditions. I think that, again, for me, when I'm thinking of a quarterback, I don't want the quarterback to add to my issues. 49ers had a lot of issues this year. And I think that the quarterback position is one where it's like, we got our guy, Brock. We're going to be paying you 60, 58, whatever, $1 million per year. Just don't make things worse. And I think that everyone, when they're talking about this season and they start talking about Brock Purdy, they start bringing up everything else around as to why 49ers only have 6 wins. And when I think of a franchise quarterback, I'm thinking of someone that, regardless of the circumstances, you can always say, you know what, man, this was a bad year, but that guy was not the reason that it turned out that way. He wasn't turning the ball over in late minutes when you actually have opportunities to win. And even talking about the Cincinnati Bengals, right? And Joe Burrow, they're going to miss the postseason, but there is nobody that will even whisper that Joe Burrow was a part of the problem. He played lights out. He dominated a lot of these games. 45 touchdowns, less than 10 turnovers, right? So he played lights out, and it's just like, man, you know what? His 38 points in this game wasn't enough. His 34 points in this game wasn't enough. His 34 points in this other game wasn't enough. But then we look at Brock, and it's like, oh, a third quarter drop by Deebo Samuel, and the 49ers lose. It's like, Deebo's the problem. It's like, dude, you scored 6 points. Scored 6 points. So, and I'm not saying that there aren't those instances where you just have an off game or a bad game or whatever. But I just felt like in a situation like this, when I'm looking to pay a guy $58 million per year, I just don't want you to add to a list of the issues. And I think Brock Purdy kind of did that this year. And that would be the one thing that makes me hesitant to pay him that amount. If you want to pay him what Baker Mayfield is getting paid, right? And Mayfield is a guy who I think had some similar situations, right? Like, it's not like he had the best supporting cast. He lost 2 receivers at some point. Then, Mike Evans came back, but his main guy, Godwin, wasn't there. They may do with their backs and Bucky Irvin, and I like him, but there's not a lot of guys that people can rattle off names on that Tampa Bay Buccaneers roster. But regardless, they found a way to go to the playoffs. Found a way with Baker Mayfield. And I was looking for Brock Purdy to just kind of find a way, even if it's not the playoffs, but can you find a way to win 8 games, 9 games, have an opportunity? And he wasn't able to do that under these circumstances, which are tough. But when everything is great, of course, it's going to be good. He's awesome. And we've seen that. But we all know from year to year, it's not always going to be ideal. And that may be my biggest concern with paying him that amount of money. But if the 49ers paid him 42, 43, 45 million, I don't think I would view him the same way and have the same expectations on him. Am I fair to say that, or do you think now you're being too harsh?
No, I think that's exactly the problem. So Brock Purdy's evaluation is probably the most fascinating to me. And it's not because, we do 49ers content. It's because everyone is looking to, downplay what Brock Purdy does because he's the last pick in the draft. And the 49ers, from a value standpoint, have gotten so much from him when you pay him less than $1 million per year. The value that you're getting at the quarterback position probably exceeds anywhere else because all those guys are being paid $60 million, right? You're winning and you having an offense with a guy that's less than $1 million is something that's insane, right? Like it's insane value. Now, on the flip side, once he gets his contract, which he will, once he gets his extension, everything's going to change. Everything is going to change in terms of how he's viewed because now everyone who was already against whatever it is that he stood for in terms of like, last pick in the draft and how much you're getting from the value is like, well, that's why you don't pay somebody that amount of money because he's not that guy. And when you are paid that amount of money, you are expected to have losses, whether it's on defense, whether it's on offensive line, whether it's on offense, right? Like I think speaking of the Bengals have to pay Jamar Chase. Does that mean that T. Higgins has to walk? And how much of that really helps out the Bengals as well, too? But because you have the quarterback to lift, right? Like you expect them to cover up whatever deficiencies you have on defense. If your defense slides a little, it's okay because our offense is going to be better and we're going to cover that up. Okay, our offensive line is going to take a step back because we couldn't pay guys. Okay, our quarterback is going to lift by moving out of the pocket, using his legs and making plays. That's where the evaluation changes. Now, I think he's definitely going to get paid, but you're absolutely bang on when it comes to now the expectations are going to be completely different. You're going to be asked. And when those games happen, when you have you have a chance with the fourth quarter and it ends in an interception, now it gets magnified even further because when you're paid that amount of money, everybody expects you to come through and lift your team up. And I think that's where we're going to find out a little bit more about Brock. But I do think he's going to get paid, but the expectations will change no matter how much the money is. So yeah, it's a strange thing because of how people have already viewed Purdy and how they're about to change their view of him. And it almost kind of goes hand in hand with how people have disliked him or not disliked him, pushed back on the idea that he's a very good quarterback or a good quarterback in this league because of the system or the weapons or whatever, and how that's going to change now if he does have to suffer some losses. Like if you can't bring somebody back on defense, if you can't bring somebody back on offense, but you did pay the quarterback is going to have to do some of the heavy lifting. I agree with that.
The expectations definitely changed. And full disclosure, nobody here is saying Brock Purdy won't get paid. I think I put at 95% chance he has a new contract before the season starts. What percentage do you put it at that the 49ers pay him and pay him handsomely that make him potentially the second highest paid quarterback in the league? I expect that to happen.
Yeah. 99%. Yeah. I mean, there's no way that the 49ers don't do this. Like, and when you listen again to what they've been saying, he's the guy that we're down with. And this next part of Kyle's time is directly tied to Brock Purdy. We've allowed you so many years to go and find the quarterback. You thought you had it with Jimmy. We allowed you to go after Trey. Those didn't work out. You find Purdy. You can't go through another time where you're just like, hey, we evaluated these quarterbacks and this third one doesn't work either. Like that's when the patience is going to wear thin, I believe. And Brock Purdy is directly tied to Kyle Shanahan and his success and how this new era is going to go.
We'll continue to have this conversation about Brock Purdy and his contract and try to, just kind of bring some different angles to it. But of course, this is something that we expect to happen. We definitely want to thank you all for making Locked On 49ers your first listener of the day. He is Jason Aponte. Aponte, tell everyone where they can find you on social media, your podcast, your YouTube channel.
Yeah, thanks, Croc, for having me, man. Yeah, Jason Aponte 2103 on Twitter or X, whatever it is that the kids are calling it. Jason Aponte on YouTube. And yeah, Gold Standard Podcast Network, Sprint Right Option Podcast, all that good stuff. State of the Franchise. And again, shout out to Brian Peacock. We're thinking about you, buddy. Hope everything's well.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you guys hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you guys tomorrow for Winky Wednesday. We're out. Peace.